So that makes perfect sense. And I'm glad you set up all that architecture around why public schools are pretty much not reformable. But I was also curious, like, are there opportunities in charter schools then, right? I know charter schools, let's say, for example, in Chicago, the point I was trying to make earlier is that there's a lot of capture that prevents them from properly being charter schools, right? And playing out different experiments. But I'm curious, like, whether it's a charter school or I guess Anton Academy, I think or Acton Academy, I think is one that you brought
Acton
on
is a
your
good one, yeah.
podcast. Yeah. What would a DAO look like running one of those schools? Like, let's say in
This is a
Chicago,
great
right?
example of the type of instance in which you would never want to use a DAO.
Okay.
A DAO would always be pointless for doing this. The reason being is there is nothing you could do with a DAO in terms of running a domestic, US-based, or really in most developed countries based company or nonprofit. There's just nothing you could do that you couldn't do with a traditional system. It's like you could say, okay, well, with a DAO, we want to like give students a vote in what's happening, right? Oh, that's great. You could literally then just give students the vote without creating a DAO. Like, how has the DAO helped there? Oh, well, with a DAO, what we could do is sort of decentralize in the way students are working on tests. Now that ends up having a role in the way, money is distributed within the system. And it's like, yeah, or you could literally just write on a sheet of paper, how students are doing on tests changes where money is being distributed within the system, and it's cheaper and easier, and it's legally binding. Which sometimes things that happen within a DAOs aren't necessarily legally binding because the legal system wasn't really built to work with them. And so it's a great example of just because DAOs exist doesn't mean that they're going to be, as I said, and I'll go back to, there are really right now only a few instances in which you want a DAO over a traditional structure. You have anonymous members because the existing legal system can't deal with that, but then it's illegal if it's at least not a nonprofit. I'm sure you know why it's illegal. I forget why. It's essentially, the reason it's illegal is it would be like having somebody owning stake in a company, like stock in a company, but that person is anonymous. And that is an illegal thing to do in almost every developed country, I think, for pretty obvious reasons. Like, you don't want people owning a bunch of stuff anonymously. Well, if you're a government and you're trying to maintain control, you don't want, for example, like China to be able to come in and secretly own half of all your major companies. So that's why you don't allow anonymous company ownership. But a DAO could allow for that. In part because the legal system specifically disallows for that, but it is intrinsically illegal when it's operating. Or if it was operating in a region that didn't have a stable governance system, or that was operating across multiple governance systems. So like if our school system was operating in like every country on earth simultaneously, a DAO might be better, but not really, because then like world courts and everything like that, like you're probably better off just creating independent iterations that are operating within these. Never mind, that's probably not a good instance. The final place where a DAO could be useful is if you're creating a governance system that you expect to last longer than the umbrella governance system. And I think that this is the number one use case for DAOs today, is for basically preppers. People who think that the US governing system and the developed world isn't long for this world. There's actually a lot of reasons to believe it's not long for this world. We can get into that if that's interesting to your listeners. But if you're trying to build a system that you're like, yeah, but I want it to work even when the US legal system falls apart, even when the economy as we understand it falls apart, even when, there's no longer police or judicial systems to uphold this system, well, then there a DAO becomes interesting. But until things fall apart, it's strictly going to be costlier and less efficient than just writing what you want the governance system to do on a sheet of paper. Again, it's like running Doom on a refrigerator. Like, right. Why would you do that when you can just write it down? Like, I can do a DAO or I can just write on a paper. This is the way my company operates. The core utility for most people in doing this is that it helps them raise money. They are able to say, hey, look, crypto people, you have lots of money. Give me that money to operate this DAO. And it's a crypto